Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode, like all episodes, brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow the show on the social media, Twitter and Facebook, SWGM Podcast. Support the show on Patreon. Become a regular Patreon supporter, patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. Follow the show on YouTube, which may not be there much longer, at the YouTube channel Savage Worlds GM Podcast, and subscribe, like, share, and review on iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Tonight's topic, flaws and failures. And here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And Dustin, the Savage Intern.
Kermit the Frog here.
I think it's Dustin the Savage Intern. Okay, so what are we talking? Oh, and if you're watching the live stream on the YouTube channel, feel free to comment in the chat room. We do bring in those comments and discuss them as well. So tonight's topic, I want to kind of have a little bit of a discussion as a GM and as a player in role-playing games, the two Fs. And I'm not talking about Fast and Furious with Savage Worlds. I'm talking about flaws and failure. I don't think that enough players and GMs, or players specifically, let's start on the flaws side of it. I don't see a lot of players creating characters with interesting flaws.
Now, you're talking beyond hindrances for Savage Worlds?
Well, it could be hindrances, but those hindrances can be flaws. Like the character is flawed, selfish. They only look out for number one, and then watch that role played throughout the character, and having them either grow out of that flaw, deal with that flaw over time, where there's an actual arc in the development and progression of the character as part of role play. I see a lot of things like, well, I want to build Fighty McFighterson. I want to be a total badass wizard. And I don't think there's enough sort of flawed built into the character. And I apologize for the 15th time. I'm going to use Dave's character from Dead End as a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I say creating a flawed character. His character description: Harry is an obese, middle-aged garbage man with no life ambitions except his personal hobbies of ham radio, fishing, and dumpster diving. That is a flawed character in a zombie apocalypse setting, or any setting for that matter, because Go ahead, Dave. You look like you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I think, and this is obviously going to be one of those Dave's telling everyone they're doing it wrong moments. I think a big part of this is something that young writers run into. And I don't mean young as an age, I mean young as an inexperienced. And you're creating Mary Sue's. You're creating a character that's effective in every situation they're put into, rather than making a character that's truly flawed and interesting. We see this all the time when a movie suddenly gets handed to a new director, and the first movie comes out and you got these bombastic, larger-than-life characters. And then the sequel comes out, and the sequel is inevitably about the things that are wrong with the characters that lead them into trials and tribulations. And, we see this time and time again. Let's just take a simple example that I know everybody in the audience will have seen is Empire Strikes Back. And in this movie, we see that Han's background as a gambler not only gives him a contact he can reach out to an Empire to fix the Millennium Falcon, but also leads him to a friend who's maybe not really a friend and is still a little sore at him and is not above turning him over to the law. And then the friend realizes that the law went way beyond what the friend was looking for in retribution. And, the friend suddenly is going to try to save him. But Han still suffers this flaw of being kind of a scumbag gambler who maybe cheated to win the Millennium Falcon, hurt somebody's feelings, who then backstabs him in the middle of Empire Strikes Back, which leads to him being frozen in carbonite and needing to be saved by his friends. That's an amazing storyline that doesn't happen if that character is not a scumbag. and if we don't explore the fact he's a scumbag. But
Right.
Han is an amazing hero, and the fans don't want to see that. The players don't want to see their character as not the amazing hero. They don't want to see the complex human character that's flawed and has these problems. And that's where that kicks in, and just like the inexperienced writer, they skip over the flaw. The flaw is something that's just there for those extra character points at creation.
So the term Mary Sue comes from a Star Trek fan fiction, and the character, I don't know if anybody has ever run into the 14-year-old Asian girl that could do anything before, but that is your archetypical Mary Sue. Literally just steps out, and Spock says, "Oh, you're so logical and brilliant in science." And Captain Kirk is like, "Here, sit in my chair. Yes, looks good on you."
Well, it's also too, like you see this in movies too, where you have, and I'm sorry, this is going to sound sexist. I'm not meaning it to be sexist or misogynist, but you always see a lot, especially like in 80s movies, 90s movies, the trope, the smoking hot female scientist who goes from, or the librarian who, oh, I'm all nerdy, and then I whip off my glasses, my hair. Yeah, I shake my hair, and oh fuck, I'm a bombshell.
Yeah.
That's a Mary. Come on, what are you doing? Not saying that, attractive women can't be smart, but it's just this whole thing of like, oh, come on, really? You're a genius chemist and a Playboy centerfold?
And the male version is the Gary Stew. We're not singling out the ladies here. There is a Marty Stew, a Gary Stew,
right,
and a Mary Stew. Mary is the matriarch of the family. She's the first one. Congratulations, Mary. You're the trailblazer. We're just trying to catch up with you. It takes two guys to be a horrible character as Stew, but
right. So, like, you see this too in movies too, like the action hero who's all about punching guys and can take a hit, and he's an expert marksman who never misses. Oh, and he also knows how to defuse a bomb expertly, and he knows how to do forensic science. Here's the one I love is the drug dealer. You see it every action movie. Oh, we're going to exchange money for heroin, or a cop finds a stash of heroin, and you always see the, oh, that's 100% pure. Really?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is if we're going to use pop culture as the litmus test to what is a good character, what isn't, if we're going to use pop culture as the banner at which we're going to hold our role-playing characters against, there's plenty of examples of complex characters that have problems, that the problem is a crux of the story.
Yeah, there's two that I can think of right off the bat: Walter White and Jesse Pinkman.
Yeah, that's good
You
examples.
talk about flawed characters.
I was thinking Lethal Weapon. You've got Riggs and Murtaugh in that. Murtaugh is very much, he's got to be all about image. He can't appear like, don't put your arm around me when I'm naked. You have these moments that Riggs then plays off of and puts him in situations where he looks bad. And Riggs is just insane. I mean, let's not beat around the bush on this. The man is clinically insane and has the death wish hindrance, and he's constantly trying to get himself killed. Mm-hmm. That is a huge thing, and it comes up time and time again. Even in the later films, when the death wish has been resolved, it still ends up being this part of his character's backstory that plays an integral part to setting off his emotional turmoil. Mm-hmm. The character remains flawed even at the tail end of his arc, where he's the superhero at the end of the movie. At the end of the fourth movie, he's still superhero, can take on guys half his age or, experts in the field of martial arts, but he still has those emotional rage moments. I mean,
Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Peter Parker, he has got the vow major and code of honor hindrances. With great power comes great responsibility. Says it over and over again. And we take that as a virtue, but it's a flaw. And it drives him crazy. It forces him to be a reluctant hero. And that the thing of it is, what makes him dynamic as a character and what makes the audience really like him, at the end of the day, he's got that flaw. It is a legitimate flaw, but you know that he's going to help somebody because of it.
Right. Well, to use literary examples, let's veer off pop culture for just a second. Ahab.
Vengeful Major.
He is just obsessive vengeful to the very bitter end. Nothing is going to get between him and his goddamn white whale. I will kill it. I will find it. I don't care who I have to sacrifice to do it, including myself.
And he goes
is a major flaw.
He goes so far as to then have the whale personify evil. Every time he talks about it, it's the evil whale. It's the demon whale. He makes it the focus of everything bad in the world so that he then has to kill it for the good of everyone else. That way, when he tells you he's going after the white whale, you can't tell him otherwise, because how do you argue with someone who's sacrificing themselves for you? And that's a complex way of taking the vengeful major hindrance and twisting it into self-sacrifice is really the way you're going to roleplay vengeful, but it works for that character. But again, it requires a complex look at a character, and as a role player, that's your job as the player, is to take that character down that complex path.
And I would say too, let's one more example here real quick. Hamlet. Shakespeare. Anybody who's familiar with the story of Hamlet, here is a person who knows what's right and knows what he should do, but is conflicted and non-committal. He won't commit to doing it.
I want to point something out about Hamlet. That whole soliloquy, the quality of mercy, is the most badass, vindictive thing ever said in theater, because he literally says, I got him. I know he's guilty. I want to kill him, but I'm not going to kill him while he's praying because he has to go to hell.
Yep. Well, and look at what happens to Hamlet as a result. He plots and plots and plots and waits for the perfect moment. And then because of his inaction, that causes his own death.
Yep. And the death of everybody he loves.
Yeah. The queen and everybody. Yeah.
He's not just vengeful major. He's also delusional.
Yeah, to a degree. I would agree. So Alec Munzi has a couple of things. So let's start with the first one you posted up there, Dustin. Go ahead and read that off for Alec.
Alex says, flaws taken to an extreme become the anti-Mary Sue. Character is evil or cowardly and needs to be convinced to save a village. The player won't take action until the rest of the table can justify.
And then he adds to that, because the comment is right after it, because he hit the character limit, that then their hindrance ends up punishing the party instead of themselves. So the thing there is, you're talking about two different things, Alec. You're talking about a complex character who has a flaw that needs to be overcome. That's a great character in Savage Worlds or any role-playing game. The player leaning on the character's flaw as the reason not to engage with the game is a player flaw, and that's the player doing it wrong. Don't roleplay with assholes.
Engage that flaw and see where it takes the story.
I'll give you a great example. So let's say you have a character whose flaw is they're greedy. And the reason they're greedy is because they're self-serving. As greedy is just an extension of them being self-serving. Hey, where's my share? Hey, that's not fair. I participated in this. You guys are leaving me out. I'm always concerned about what I get. Where's mine? Because I'm self-serving. So you have a character who, let's say in a zombie apocalypse, is self-serving and sees everybody refilling water bottles. And when nobody's looking, takes a couple of those water bottles and sticks them in their backpack. Now, are they being a dick and stealing water from the group? No, that's an insurance policy, and they're playing out that flaw. And I'm sure if they get captured or caught doing it, it's going to be, well, no, I was just holding on to it. I wasn't stealing. I was just holding on to it.
Unless they've also taken the mean hindrance, in which case they'll just tell you to your face that no, that's their water.
But it doesn't have to be played heavy-handedly.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. You don't have to, like Dave said, make the player issue where it forces your flaw on the entire party to the entire party's detriment. Your flaw should really be more about your flaw and role playing that out and making decisions based on you being a flawed human being character.
I'm going to go ahead and say this for the players out there. If you're going to play an evil character, and I got this off of one of the YouTube videos I watched. Sorry, Jared, I've been cheating on the channel. If you're going to play an evil character, you have to play an evil character to the people outside of the party, but you have to play a good character to the people inside the party. You have to play it like these are your friends, or at least your minions you like. You can't be so retentive. Like, the best villains are the ones that kind of go with the flow. The worst villains are the ones that everything is going according to plan. No, they're not.
So you're saying you have to be like a serial killer.
Yes,
Two different faces.
Yes,
do
it. Do
Interesting. That's how you would interpret that, Chris.
No, it's because I'm reading a book right now about a certain person, and that's what he does. He calls he calls it cubing. He puts everything into cubes, and he can switch cubes. And he's a nice guy to the right people, and he's not so nice to other people.
All right, well, let's dip back in this. Let's dip back in the pulp culture pool and talk about this. So, let's say you have a character who's a serial killer. So, how do you play that character who's flawed and narcissistic and a serial killer without it in directly becoming an issue for everybody else in your group and your party? Well, look at Dexter. I only kill the bad ones.
Right.
Yeah.
I only kill the bad guys. I don't and I protect everybody who's around me by keeping that secret and not letting it show. So I'm not this impulsive axe wielding. I'm very calculated, cautious when I go about doing it and how I go about doing it. Now that's going to cause all kinds of problems for that player, for that character. It's going to cause a ton of problems. And yeah, it's going to spill out on the rest of the party. But how the rest of the party decides to deal with it also comes to their role play. And the character isn't necessarily forcing that on everybody.
Yeah.
Not so much. Go ahead, Dave. I can see the
problem I have with this idea is that it pigeonholes the way you have to play. I have to be nice to other people to be an evil. I have to be nice to the party and evil to everyone else to play an evil character. I can't be Dr. Evil, who's openly hostile to his own son, but doesn't try to kill him. He just demeans him personally. He's not nice to Scott. He's evil to Scott. He's just far more evil to the rest of the world.
right.
There's a gradient, I think, that can be achieved where you're evil all the fucking time, but you're less evil to the people who are in the party who are helping to serve your goals than you are to the people who are outside the party.
And I think you're right, Dave. I think you're right. Maybe the way I phrased it wasn't quite in line as to what it should be. I would say more or less you're not antagonistic to the party.
Well, and I think you can absolutely be antagonistic to the other members of the party and get away with it. It's just I take my gun and shoot him in the head, and I take my gun and pistol whip him. One I might do to an enemy, the other I might do to a compatriot who I'm pretty pissed off in the moment. Pistol whipping, I can declare non-lethal and knock you out with a knockout blow, but I can also just turn the gun on you and shoot if I have to play that character. And I think that's the ultimate crux to this conversation is Stop worrying about what Dr. Evil does or Darth Vader does. Stop worrying about what podcast A or podcast B told you, and figure out who is your character and what would they do. That's the more important thing. I can't tell you how to play your character. I can tell you when you're being an asshole to the rest of the party by holding up a hindrance as the reason your character doesn't participate, but I can't tell you how do you then take that hindrance and play it to the hilt the way your character would. You have to make that determination in the moment at the table. And it's a muscle that if you don't start flexing now, you'll find yourself continuing to fall back on poor habits 10 years down the road because you haven't gotten better at that aspect of role-playing. The players you remember playing with who played complex characters didn't used to be good at that. They started out making those same poor choices, but they worked at it over time. I understand the you're doing it wrong aspect of the conversation, but at the same time, there's two sides of that. There's the you're doing it wrong because you're being an asshole to the other players at the table, not as a character, but as a player, by not participating, by stopping the game, by being an obstruction to everybody having fun. But you can also just have your character be an asshole, and that can be interesting. That can move the story.
Right. Well, let's talk about, because Alec also talks about pacifism. So let's talk about that. He states pacifism isn't a flaw. I disagree. It's a flaw. If you're in a big fighty game, it's a flaw. But I digress. Killing despite being pacifist is a flaw. Now, here I will say this. Let me finish reading everything. Role play the consequences of the flaw. Don't say my character can't fight here because he's a pacifist. I would agree. I'd also take it one step further. If your character's flaw is he's a pacifist and doesn't believe in violence in any way, shape, or form, then him role-playing that flaw in a group that's all about hack and slash murder hoboism is more about the character trying to stop the other players from committing violence against everybody. This is the character who puts his own self at risk to stop somebody else from being beaten. Will stand in between and go, you guys got to stop.
Right. Can't we get along? We need to discuss this. Can't we figure out a different way to do this? Why does it always have to go to violence?
Right. Now putting them in a situation, I think putting them in a situation too, where they're forced to make a very, very hard choice. Like, wait, I don't believe in killing, but they're about to kill my very best friend. And talking isn't working. Oh, Jesus, do I pick up? Now, that's where the flaw comes into play, is after they deal with that consequence. And to that degree, I'll agree 100% with what Alec is saying. It's how do you deal with the aftermath of, oh, God, I did this to save somebody. Oh, I'm so conflicted. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I think there's an aspect to talk about, too, in pacifism is a very interesting hindrance because, one, it's minor and major. A minor pacifist will get into physical combat regularly. They just don't strike to kill if they don't have to. A major pacifist will only go into physical altercations to protect themselves or others, and it has to be a loved one. It can't just be some random guy on the street, because you don't care about that other person enough to risk your pacifism, but you will never use lethal as a major. Those are the benchmarks for those two. And I think it's very interesting to play with, because I've played a pacifist major in a game who also had bloodthirsty. And the two, I had to roleplay the conflict between I'm bloodthirsty against all of these monsters, werewolves, undead, etc., and my pacifism didn't apply to them, but it applied to everyone else. So I was constantly finding myself jumping on, werewolves with a knife, no ability to actually kill them, and stabbing them to save other people, because my pacifism said I had to save that person, and my bloodthirsty said I had to kill the werewolf.
I got one for you with that combo, Dave. pacifism and bloodthirsty, you could have a character that is playing a medic or a healer and always goes over there to heal the opposition, but instead of healing them, actually kills them. Like the player can roll fighting instead of healing to actually do more damage. They can be a sadist and torture them. And then they could have the secret or dark secret hindrance too, because, or even delusional, because they actually do that and it creates development.
I'm ending their suffering. It's a form of healing.
And ending their suffering. Yeah, they can justify in their own mind. It's sort of like that angel of death or angel of mercy. It's like, well, they're suffering. They're in a great deal of pain. And this is why everybody that gets a stub toe or a splinter has to die. Like, it's just too much to deal with.
Now, Nomad 1492 says in chat, a flaw and a hindrance are different things. You can play hindrances as a flaw, but you don't have to. And I think all flaws don't have to be hindrances. All hindrances have to be flaws. If you took a hindrance as a player character, if you were paid points for it, it is a flaw of the character. Whether it's overzealousness in being heroic because you'll put your life at danger. That's what makes it a flaw, is that you have to do it. Then it's written there, and the way those are worded, the hindrances very much are written. They have to be detrimental to the player character in some manner. Even quirk is written that it has to be something that you do almost to the point of annoying everyone enough that they're going to pick a fight with you. The way the hindrances are worded, they have to be flaws. That's why they're there. It's the purpose they play in Savage Worlds.
Right. And they don't have to be okay, let me say this. They don't have to be grandiose either. Take illiterate, for example. Illiterate is as far as the hindrance in Savage Worlds, highly overlooked. Great character flaw in a modern age where everybody's expected to know how to read. And now you have a character who's not only illiterate, they're too proud to admit they don't know how to read. And that creates interesting, compelling drama and role play at the table because, you know, somebody hands your character a thing and says, hey, here's a grocery list. We need these supplies. We're counting on you to get them. Yeah, okay. So now your character has to deal with, okay, I can't read any of this. So do I show this to a stranger and trust them? Do I get taken? Do I pretend like I know what it is and make my best guess? Do I admit I don't know how to read? It's an interesting character flaw.
3 times the value because I pay some delivery service to bring it to me because I just have to give them the list instead of having to go in and pick those things up off the shelf.
Right. Or do you, as a GM, do you go, you know what, you're illiterate. You were there when he was making out the list. He was saying everything he was writing down. Give me a smarts roll to -4 to see if you remember all of it. I mean, there's interesting ways for the flaw to come into play between the GM and the table and the players and characters. It doesn't have to be this, I'm a pacifist, I never fight. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be so on the nose and telegraphed as this is a very like it's very one-dimensional as a character flaw.
You know,
go ahead, Jared or Dustin.
One of the things, a lot of times in these games, I will play a face character. And I will go ahead and tell you this. If you want to play the pacifist role, you have to think of alternatives to fighting, because a pacifist will probably have some good persuasion or stealth, because that's what they're going to do. They are going to slip around the fight, even like taunts or smart tricks. Okay. I just have to tell you, like, if you have to take a hindrance that limits you in one area, then you have a method of contemplating to compensate, because that's what real people do. They compensate for a shortcoming. So a pacifist who either can't or won't fight probably is going to be really good at coming up with reasons why the other side doesn't want to fight them.
Right. Oh, let's talk about this too. Let's paint a little outside the lines. Let's color outside the lines for a second. What if I create a character who's an ex-boxer who killed a man in the ring and is terrified of hitting somebody so hard that they kill them again? What if I take phobia major? And that's how I choose to play that. Now, does that mean that I don't ever fight? No. Am I kind of playing a pacifist? Yeah. But when I do fight, it's going to be at a -4 because I'm terrified of that trauma of revisiting those emotions of I right hooked the guy and broke his neck.
And as a GM, you are completely justified if that character is pitched to you to say you get full rolls on your to hit rolls. It's your damage rolls that suffer the -4 instead of your to hit rolls. Because that's what you're actually afraid of. You're afraid to hit them with everything you've got.
And then put the character in a fugue state situation that challenges that.
And I think an aspect of this that we are overlooking is the other side of this conversation, the failures aspect. Is most of these flaws should come up in game to lead to the interesting failures we're also trying to talk about tonight. You know, trying to avoid the flaw so that you don't have the failure smacks of the I have to win at role playing, I have to succeed on every dice roll, which again, I'm just going to say is amateur role playing. You're not getting as much out of the game as you could. If it's fun for you and your entire group, I guess continue, but I think you would find a much better experience if you embraced your flaw leading to a failure that leads to the next part of our conversation. So
yeah, let's talk about failures then. And here's what I want to talk about is embracing failure. Not as oh God, we got defeated, but as okay, we're going to take a sidestep, a pit stop along the story, and we all agree and we all understand as players that this is a necessary pit stop to take off of the road because it's going to lead to new interesting information. So, for example, your characters allowing themselves to be captured, and instead of sitting there going, "Oh God, I can't believe we were captured in prison," the GM's being a dick. Understand that you getting captured in prison is a good thing because the guy in the cell next to you has information you need for another part of the plot, and this is a convenient way to do it. It's an opportunity to role play, grow as a character, and also move the story forward in an interesting way that just doesn't involve you running through the countryside, killing everybody you come across.
But Jared, if I trust the GM like that, he's just going to use that failure to screw me over.
Yep, he's going to fuck you. You're absolutely right. That's what he's going to do, right? So I think there needs to be some. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to say this as a GM, and Dave and I were having this conversation too. This is a very important part, and this part is for the GMs in the audience. So listen carefully. Don't pounce on failures to screw your character and give them the worst possible result. So, for example, you're a bunch of we're in the Old West. We're going to try to board a train from riding horses up next to it, and we're going to go give me agility roll to -2 to leap from your saddle onto the ladder, and they fail the agility roll. Now, the result of that is not they fall, roll underneath the tracks, and get cut in half. The result of that is not they fall, break their neck, or break an arm and leg, and the rest of the posse leaves them behind.
Oh, the result of that, comes all that falling damage because you fell 2 stories from where the train is down the embankment before you stopped. So here comes 4d6 exploding damage.
Right. Here's what happens. Oh, damn. You reach at the last moment and you hit hard and your ribs smack against the metal. You now have a level of a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises. Now, that failure allows the story to continue, but also presents a challenge because now the player is rolling in a -1 for other actions they do. They don't critically, horribly fail because they didn't get a success on a roll.
And I would add to that don't follow it up with a second dice roll. This is not they failed the jump, now give them a strength roll to pull themselves up. No, they automatically pull themselves aboard because that's part of that narration, is that they did grab hold, but they're going to suffer the fatigue for it. Don't slow the game down even further, putting more and more dice rolls in front of the player that they have to overcome to achieve the narrative.
Right. So don't use random dice events to punish the players in the most cruel way you could think of and call that, here's the consequence of failure.
And I'm sorry, it looked like I cut you off there, Chris. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say one of the things, too, that makes it a little more difficult in Savage Worlds with people wanting to accept failure is, everybody knows what I'm about to say, bennies. And sometimes you just need to not spend 5 bennies to do something. Just go with you didn't make that jump roll to get on the train. And hopefully, like we've already said, you have the GM who's going to, make it cool and not debilitating as a failure. But in Savage Worlds, that is so much, people just don't think that way, because I'm going to spend bennies until I succeed, no matter what I'm trying to do. It could be some little, there's been times when I'm like, make a notice roll and people are like, I'm going to spend bennies. I'm like, no. Don't spend bennies. And maybe that's something where I maybe shouldn't even have make a notice roll if they're nothing to see if they fail. So that's a failure on my part.
Well, exactly. And I think that's where we as GMs all have to learn every game. It doesn't matter how many times I've run the game. Something's going to happen where all of a sudden a player reacts to what I put in front of them in a manner that is detrimental to the fun of the game. And I slot that away as yet another mistake I made by not positioning that in a manner that increased the fun. I think that's an aspect of this, but I think it's a two-sided coin. If as a GM, you're not trustworthy, your players aren't going to trust you to embrace failure. And if as a player, you never embrace failure, the GM is going to jump on those random failures that do occur to give some form of negative backlash to the game. Because otherwise, this is just the story of you and your wonder friends who never fail at anything.
Right. And really, how fun is that in the long run? Maybe it is fun for your group. We say that all the time. If it's fun for your group, then I guess go for it. So be it. But sometimes failure leading to other cool stuff is not a bad thing.
Well, we've said this before on the podcast too. And if you listen for any length of time, failure is 100 times more interesting than success. It leads to interesting events and story moving forward in interesting ways. Go ahead, Dustin.
So I don't know if anybody remembers Wiggy's Daring Tales of Adventures, Daring Tales of the Sprawl, Daring Tales of the Space Lanes, but there was a setting rule called complications. Surrender and complications. And it was literally, with no rolls, a failed test, because narratively, the heist had to be botched. A security guard had to walk around the corner. And the answer was, whenever there's a complication, give all the players a Benny as the GM, because you're imposing this complication on them. And it worked. And you could surrender. It was great, because if you surrendered, then the GM had to consider the motivation. You're not just going to kill someone that you find. You're going to find out what they know, who the leak is. It's like going back to Lethal Weapon. Honest to goodness, they could have just shot Riggs and Murtaugh and be done with it. But they take him in the back and they hook him up to that like electroshock chihuahua thing.
Right.
And he ends up
the big ass freaking sponges.
Like it would shock everybody in the room. I'm just going to say this. If your method of torture is a wet floor and a power cable, you deserve a Darwin Award. Okay?
Now hold on a second. He was wearing rubber dish gloves. God damn it.
Yes, and they would have worked great if they were on his feet.
Yeah, and he might as well have been chewing a Tide Pod.
Right. So,
Tide Pods.
Let's dissect that for a second. Why did the writers do that? 2 reasons. To show Riggs is a total badass and to give him a convenient way to escape. Oh, he's done. No, he would have told us, oh, he's hanging there and playing possum until he gets around top and then snaps his neck and frees everybody. That's why that whole scene is there. There's nothing the bad guys get out of doing that.
So there's an interesting thing here, and we've talked about, obviously the rules that have come before, but they just re-added this to Savage Worlds in Flash Gordon. And you now get a shiny little cliffhanger token as a party that you as a group have to decide, when does things get really bad? And a majority rule, the players decide when the cliffhanger happens. And then there's this list of really bad shit the GM gets to do to you as a party because you as a party decided you wanted to suffer it. I mean, let's be honest here. It is codified right in the Flash Gordon book with a new setting rule for the players to basically vote when they want it to get really bad.
Right.
It's that much fun. Try it in your game.
Right. And I understand too that if the opportunity is there for you to fail and the odds are pretty high you're going to, buy in. Play along. Understand James Bond has to get captured trying to sneak into Goldfinger's fort, not because he's bad at sneaking into places, so he can wake up tied to a table and hear Goldfinger monologue about his grand plan and scheme so that he can later stop it. That's why that scene is there. That's why the failure is foretold by the writer going, nope, yeah, James Bond, he's going to get caught. Oh, then we'll also introduce the love interest. Let's take another look at Superman, Christopher Reeves, 1977. He burst in. He falls right into Lex Luthor's trap, coming into the underground to be, have a kryptonite necklace put around his neck and tossed in a pool. And I win. But why? So Lex Luthor could tell him the entire plan. And then Miss Tessmacher can feel all bad because her mother lives in one of these states, and please, Superman, save her. I'll release you if you promise to save her first. And then, where's Lois Lane? Oh, she's on the opposite side of the country. It's all drama. It's all set up. This whole thing of him failing is not because Superman is stupid. It's because it moves the story along in a very interesting way. That's all we're talking about with embracing failure.
We hear this all the time. How do I have my supervillain challenge my players? How do how does my villain, my Billy Bad, ever get revealed to the players without them immediately filling him full of arrows or bullets or swords and he's dead in the first scene that I introduce him? Well, one is, don't introduce your Billy Bad when combat is an option. These are great opportunities to do that. Offer your players, here's a Benny for everybody. If in this fight, one of the bad guys pulls a hostage over, puts their gun to their head, and you all lay down your guns and are captured. Why? Because now I get to introduce the badass who's going to tell you his evil plan, and then he's going to escape out the side door before I open the scene up to your interaction to then do something epic and cool and get away, and then we're going to pick up right where we would have been had you ended that combat, but now you've been informed. You had this cool scene that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Yep. And that's what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Embrace failure. GMs, build some trust with your players that you're not there to screw them over when they fail horribly, that it's okay. It's just your guys are going to go take a break and stretch your role play muscles and your exposition muscles a little bit with the storytelling. And then we're going to be right back on track in a new, interesting way that allows you to win.
And I think this also touches on something else we've talked about on the show. This is why, as a GM, it pays to be upfront with your players. Hey, give me an agility roll to jump from your horse to the train. If you fail, it's a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises that'll fade in an hour. By positioning that way, the player now knows they have this option. If the dice come up as a failure, they have something to choose to embrace without needing to have that sense of trust. Once you've built that sense of trust, you don't have to do that anymore. But if you're still in the early stages of this, you're trying to lead your players to embrace failure, you're trying to lead them to that trust, just front load it. Let them know what the bad thing is they're trying to avoid when you ask for the dice roll.
Right. And to Chris's point earlier about players spending bennies, players love bennies. If you need to take the direct, obvious approach, bribe them. I'll give you a benny not to reroll that, so that they can get an immediate reward for, I'm going to fail, but I get an immediate benny. Okay, give me the benny. All right, I failed. And then get them used get them used to the warm water in the tub before you throw them into the deep end of the pool by just benny baiting them. I'll give you a benny not to reroll that. I'll give you a benny. Oh, you know what? Your pacifist hindrance. I'm kind of thinking maybe your character might just not do that, not take any action whatsoever. I'll give you a benny for role playing that out. Any takers? No? Okay. But you can kind of build that trust, reinforce the failure is fun. And for God's sake, please, if they fail, don't have it result in their death and leave it up to a random roll. If you put them into prison, bring in a Deus Ex Machina that releases them from the prison. Don't leave it up to a dice roll.
Or don't put them in a prison at all unless you have a plan for where this prison scene leads. As a GM, the flip side to this coin is take on the ownership of coming up with interesting things when the dice fail. You need to know going in what interesting thing can happen. Chris, you've talked about the was it War of the Dead you were running where the players are all supposed to get caught in the net?
Yeah.
In that pre-written adventure, they assume failure and have an entire interesting thing that happens based on failure.
And my players bypassed it by not failing.
Right, because you gave them the opportunity to roll.
They gave them the opportunity not to fail.
Yeah. But therein lies the rub is, in that situation, Chris, what you need to do is come up with something interesting to happen when they succeed. But the adventure already provided the interesting thing on failure. And as a GM, you have to have both those ready every time you put something in front of your players. If there's a dice roll, as a GM, you need to have a clear idea of where the dice lead, regardless of how they fall. Don't ask for a dice roll if there's not a win and a loss, a success and a fail. And all of it needs to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said before, so in the previous example we were talking about Superman, Tessmacher is a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
But she comes with a catch. It's not left up to a random dice roll. It's left up to the character promising to save the person's mother who releases them before the person they love.
Oh, and
now they got this. Oh, and I know if you promise, you'll do it because you're good and upstanding and you're heroic. And I know you're Superman, and I know if you promise, you'll do it. But I'll only release you if you promise. Otherwise, you're going to die and drown from kryptonite. So she's a total Deus Ex Machina that is not, that decision and that gameplay is not left up to a random roll of the die. So when it comes time for their big moment to escape or the Deus Ex Machina to step in, please, for the love of God, do not leave that up to a randomizer.
I'm going to go ahead, if I can play off of that example, Jared, and everybody playing bingo, go ahead and take a shot, because Star Wars, New Hope, they go through the entire action scene and they're amazed that they escaped the Death Star. And then there's a cutscene where Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin are talking. And Tarkin is like, "Are you sure this plan is going to work? This sounds crazy." And Vader's like, "Of course it's going to work. They're so busy running, they don't know that we let them escape so we could chase them."
Right. But then you see Princess Leia going, "Oh, come on. They let us go. That was too easy." Like,
right?
Easy?
Because she takes after her father.
Right.
I'm also going to point something out for you diehard fans. Stormtroopers are brainwashed. Absolutely brainwashed. They have to follow the orders. And I want to point out that at no point in the canon series is the order not to hit the rebels rescinded. The one guy that manages to hit Princess Leia in the shoulder in Return of the Jedi just disappears. Like, he runs because he knows he's going to get force choked. The reason why the stormtroopers were such crack shots before Star Wars A New Hope is because nobody thought, hey, we should tell them to start hitting their targets again.
Oh, awesome. So that's also part of the whole pulp trope, right? Bullets flying everywhere, zing, zing, zing. The hero's invincible. Yeah. So is there anything else anything else in the chat room? Because I don't want to sit here and just keep repeating what and I don't see a new angle really to talk about the topic. I think we've really pretty comprehensively covered it.
I mean, Ruben puts in the whole he disagrees. Sometimes that -10 to hit and you actually roll it is great. And that, I think, goes to the crux of what bennies are supposed to do. Bennies are for the reroll on something that's really cool and matters. Bennies shouldn't be for the things that don't matter and that are very clearly something the GM is doing to set up another interesting option.
Right. They're for that cool moment when, okay, we've all decided we're going to face the werewolf, and some player gets a harebrained scheme. Wait, I got an idea. I've got a phosphorus grenade. I'm going to pull the pin, jump up, and shove it down that thing's throat and let go. Oh, my God. Do you realize the negatives you're going to be facing? It's like a -10. That's okay. I got 8 bennies. We can do this.
I think the other side of that is, too, there's how cool is it in your Star Wars game to have the gambler go down, sit down at the table, make all his dice rolls for gambling, and win the Millennium Falcon. But if he fails, if he chooses not to spend that Benny, how interesting is it to then have the next scene be where the rest of the party's talking to Chewbacca and trying to hire the Millennium Falcon to get them where they're going? In both, when succeed or fail, they're both going to lead to the Millennium Falcon. But how you got there is the interesting part.
Right. Yeah. All roads lead to Rome. Right? So it could be the illusion. Well, no, it's not the illusion of choice. You're just giving multiple paths to success with interesting diversions. All right. Well, if we have nothing else left in the chat to discuss, I think we've pretty much hammered this topic into the ground.
Val Primus says that we should just embrace the pod failure and not accept that maybe we haven't beat the dead horse enough.
And on that note, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, and Dustin saying keep rolling and stay savage.